dignitaries on the dais, as well as in the audience. I am asked to deliver keynote address in this 33rd session of History Congress, Art History Congress. I read my address. Every civilization reaches a moment in history when the basic needs of people are met, when survival is no longer its sole concern and deeper questions begin to press upon the human mind. In the Indian intellectual tradition, such moments of readiness are marked not by dates but by a word, atha. It means now, but not in the narrow chronological sense, but now in the sense of intellectual preparedness. It is in this spirit that I begin today with a phrase that is not found verbatim in any of our classical texts, but is entirely faithful to their method. Athato kala jitnyasa. Now, therefore, an inquiry into kala. Just as Athato Brahma Vidya Jidnyasa from the Brahma Sutras signals the beginning of philosophical inquiry into the eternal nature of ultimate reality, the sentence Athato Kala Jidnyasa announces something equally significant in the Indian civilizational imagination, that art is not merely ornamental, nor a diversion meant only for entertainment, but a legitimate and necessary field of disciplined inquiry. Kala, in the Indian context, doesn't merely mean art in the modern sense. It denotes structured making, embodied knowledge, cultivated perception, and trained emotion. The word Jidnyasa reminds us that Indian art was never content with spontaneity or creativity alone. It demanded method, training, reflection, and transmission. Let us, therefore, follow Kalabidnacha, an inquiry into how the Indian cultural ethos expresses itself consistently, coherently, and consciously. Arose the myriad experiences of art like sculpture, architecture, painting, music, dance, poetry, and craft. Creativity may be understood as a fundamental and universal human impulse, preceding formal history, aesthetics, or conscious interpretation of art. Archaeological evidence found the world over demonstrates that human beings engage in symbolic image making and visual art long before the emergence of articulated philosophies of art. Prehistoric petroglyphs or geoglyphs indicate that artistic activity arose not as ornament or leisure, but as an intrinsic mode of human engagement with the nature of reality. It is in this context that a frequently cited modern proposition becomes relevant, that life itself has no coherent meaning, but offers human beings the opportunity to create meaning. Long before this dilemma was articulated in philosophical terms, human creativity had already begun to respond to it by transforming necessity into culture, survival into form, and experience into symbols. The archaeological record of cave paintings from Bhimbetka in central India to Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain demonstrate that symbolic image making is a universal human impulse. These early visual marks were not decorative in the modern sense, nor were they intended for passive observation. They were embedded within ritual, memory, and communal meaning making. However, what distinguishes Indian civilization is not the existence of early artistic expression, but the continuity with which this impulse was theorized, systematized, and integrated into formal knowledge structures. While all cultures produce art, Indian civilization produced sustained reflection on how art works, why it matters, and what kind of human mind it seeks to shape. Thus, Indian art doesn't merely respond to the human need for meaning, it trains that need. It refines perception, that is darshan, moderates sentiment, that is bhava, and aligns experience with a larger metaphysical horizon. Art becomes not an escape from existential uncertainty, but
What's the
structured responsive to it. Well, what distinguishes Indian civilization is not just the recognition of this creative impulse, shared approximately, but the sustained articulation of art as both kala, embodied knowledge, and sadhana, a disciplined means of knowledge and inner refinement. Indian philosophy confronted the existential problem of the purpose of life, neither by denying to impermanence but not surrendering to absurdity. Instead, it evolved one of the most coherent and sustained aesthetic philosophies in human history, one in which art becomes a disciplined mode of meaning making, embedded simultaneously in cosmology, ethics, and metaphysics. The term ethics, aesthetics itself, is derived from the Greek word aesthesis, meaning sensation or perfection of sensation. However, all art in the Indian view of aesthetics is considered to be far more than a perception of sensation. Art is viewed as a path for the realization of the ultimate reality, the Brahman. Chitra Sutra. Chitra, in the beginning of Chitra Sutra, a treatise on visual arts from the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana. For example, it is, it is stated that the purpose of art is to show the divine grace that underlines all of creation, to help one on the path towards integration with that which pervades the universe. The Chitra Sutra opens with a didactic dialogue between King Vajra and Rishi Markandeya. The king asked, said Markandeya, the king asked, said Markandeya, how could one make a representation in painting or image of the Supreme Being who is devoid of form, smell, and emotion, destitute of sound and touch? To this Markandeya replies, the entire universe should be understood as the modification, that is Vikruti, of the formless Prakriti. The worship and meditation of the Supreme is possible for an ordinary being only, while the formless is endowed with a form, and that form is full of significance. This exchange is foundational in the understanding of Indian art because it articulates the distinctly Indian ontology of representation. Form, that is Rupa, is not a limitation imposed upon the formless, it is necessary mediation. The formless, that is Nirakara, doesn't become diminished through form. It becomes accessible to the human mind. In this framework, representation is not imitation in the Platonic sense, nor illusion in the prerogative sense. Vasudev Sharan Agarwal's notes, the Chitra Sutra treats art as a means of refining within itself how one sees statements, what one craves. In India, art was never conceived as an activity that is purely decorative or merely expressive of utilitarian. Art was understood as vidya, a structured form of knowledge. Kala as embodied knowledge and as sadhana, a practice of inner refinement. The artist was not positioned outside society as an individual pursuing self-expression, but located firmly within a larger civilizational order that understood creation is participation in a cosmic order, Rutab, rather than an assertion of his or her individuality. As art historian Ananda Kumaraswamy stated, with characteristic precision, I quote, the traditional Indian artist is not a creative individual in the modern sense, but a transmitter of a vision working within a known and intelligible order. This is from Transformation of Nature in Art. Kumaraswamy argues that the traditional Indian artist is not driven by individual self-expression of the desire to be original in the modern sense. Instead, in the Indian vision of art, the artist functions as a medium or vehicle through which a transcendent vision, a sacred knowledge is manifested. The vision that Kumaraswamy is speaking of is not personal, it is cultural. Indian art thus offers not just style, but structure, not novelty, but orientation. Idam namama. Traditional Indian art is largely anonymous because the artist consciously effaces personal ego in favor of transmitting a received vision. The creative art is understood not as self-assertion but as participation in any already existing order of truth. This principle captures succinctly in the attitude idam na mama, this is not mine, finds consistent expression across artistic domains. In architecture and sculpture, this anonymity is most visibly evident. The great temple complexes of India, whether at Ellora, Khajuraho, Konar, Tanjavur, or Hampi, are repositories of extraordinary artistic sophistication. Yet the names of individual sculptors and architects who created them are almost entirely absent. The Shilpis work within guilds, shrenis, and textual frameworks such as the Manasara, Mayamata, and Shiparatna were adherence to proportion, iconographic grammar, and metaphysical correspondence mattered more than personal authorship. As Ananda Kumar Swami observed, the temple was not a monument to human ingenuity, but a mode of thought crystallized in stone. The absence of signatures is thus not an omission, but a statement. The work belongs to the cosmos, not the craftsman. A similar ethos governs Indian painting traditions. In meteoral cycles such as Abhinta, Bab, Chittanasal, and Lepakshi, the painters remain unnamed despite the extraordinary mastery of line, color modulation, narrative pacing, and psychological subtlety. The Chitra Sutra itself does not valorize originality in the modern sense. It emphasizes drushti, that is trained vision, bhav, rasa, and proportion. In music, the principle of ego by effacement is equally foundational. Indian classical music, both Hindustani and Carnataki, privileges raga and tala as pre-existing autonomous aesthetic realities. Even in the performative traditions such as Bharatanatyam, Odissi, Kathak, or Yakshagana, the dancer is trained to sublimate personal emotion into codified abhinaya. The aim is not autobiographical expression, but sadhana nikarana, the universalization of emotion. Across these domains, anonymity is not a lack of historical consciousness, but a philosophical choice. The Indian artist doesn't ask, how do I express myself? But rather, how do I become a vehicle for what must be expressed? The work endures precisely because it is but because it is depersonalized. What remains is not the artist's name, but the cultural vision they served. In this sense, Idam is not merely an ethical posture, it is an aesthetic principle. It ensures that Indian art across media and centuries reflects continuity rather than ego, coherence rather than authorship, and truth rather than self. When the word speaks of art history, it often speaks in the language of styles, periods, artists, and patterns. When the word speaks of aesthetics, it often speaks in the language of form and technique. While India views art as ritual, beauty as truth, skill as discipline, and creativity as dharma. Thus, art in the Indian sense is ontological. It participates in being. It is in this context that Kapila Vatsayana's powerful metaphor of India's art as a flower becomes instructive. All the Indian arts are as if the myriad petals of single flower. Each petal is clearly definable, has autonomy in shape and form, but has life and vitality only as part of a whole. Watson emphasized that dance, for instance, cannot be viewed in isolation from poetry, music, and sculpture. They are interrelated, frequently interacting, and drawing from the same core themes. Natyashastra the philosophical foundations of Indian aesthetics are articulated most systematically in the Natya Shastra, attributed to Bharata Muni. The text opens with a radical and civilizationally significant proposition. The creation of Natya is as the Pancham Veda, the fifth Veda, accessible to all sections of society. This is not metaphorical rhetoric, it is a statement about how knowledge may be transmitted. Bharata states, न वेदं व्यवहारोगण्यं न च शास्त्रार्थसंशयः लोकवृत्तानुकारोऽयं नाट्यम् एतद् भविष्यति. This aphorism is frequently misunderstood when rasa is equated with emotion. Bharata is precise. Bhava is embodied sentiment. Rasa is the core aesthetic principle that leads to a real relish experience, aswada, in a rasika. In the hridaya of rasika. It is not a mere psychological reaction to a work of art, but aesthetic realizations of a deeper transcendental truth. The philosophical transformation of this insight is further achieved by Abhinav Gupta, whose monumental work, Abhinava Bharati, situates rasa within a non-dual metaphysical framework of Kashmiri Shaivism. Aesthetic experience becomes a moment in which personal limitations are suspended and human consciousness tastes its universality. Abhinav Gupta states that rasa is Brahmananda Sahodar, a sibling of Brahmananda. This worldview of profound implications of Indian art across media. In India, sculpture doesn't aim to provoke shock or novelty. Architecture doesn't see visual dominance. Poetry does not prioritize confession. Each form is celebrated to produce a specific quality of transcendental awareness. The artwork is successful not when it impresses, but when it stabilizes perception. Thus, rasa theory provides Indian aesthetics with something rare, a rigorous explanation of why art matters without reducing it to either normal instruction or subjective pleasure. Art becomes an instrument of cognitive and spiritual refinement. Rasa and the essence of Indian art. Thus, rasa may be understood as the fragrance in Kapila Vatsyan's flower metaphor, imagined intangible, pervasive, and irreducible to any one petal, while first systematized in Natya. It permeates sculpture, painting, architecture, poetry, and ritual alike. A temple oriented through the Vastu Purusha Mandala aspires ultimately towards Shandarasa. A sculptural panel evokes Veera or Karuna. A painted narrative may cultivate Sringara, while an element in the same painting may cultivate Hasya. The medium may differ, the experimental aim remains coherent. A great example of this is the sculptural panel of Ravana, Garvaharana Shilpa at the Kailash temple at Ellora, which is iconographically called Ravananugraha Murti. Many of you may have seen this sculpture. This one sculptural relief of Ravana shaking Mount Kailash, the abode of Shiva, is not merely telling a Puranic story, but it is composed as a deliberate rasa synthesis in which all 9 rasas are spatially and hierarchically ordered. At the lowest level, Ravana's comforted body, multiplied arms, and straining masculating generate Rautra rasa. Rautra here is not righteous anger, it is ego-driven fury, born of Ravana's ahankar. Yet Ravana is not carved as grotesque. Indian art doesn't deny Ravana his greatness. His monumental strength simultaneously evokes Veera Rasa, though rendered as misdirected heroism. The sheer improbability of the art, a mere mortal attempting to destabilize the cosmic axis, produces Adbhuta, reinforced by the vertical scale of the mountain and the layered words in supports. This disturbed Gana figures, the disturbed Gana figures and attendant of divinities suggest Bhailikara, a fear not of physical form, but of Theatan cosmic order, while the grotesque exaggeration of effort in Ravana's form and his donkey face, it is shown in some other cave, of course, at Ellora itself. In Ravana's form and his donkey face evokes Bibhatsa, signalizing the aesthetic repulsion associated with spiritual disfigurement. Karuna enters through the responsive presence of Parvati, tempered further by hints of hasya in the way her attendant in running away while craning her neck towards Ravana, quiet irony implicit in the curiosity. Above all, these interlocking rasas, the union of Shiva and Shakti, sustains a higher Sringara, understood here as cosmic harmony, undisturbed by chaos. Presiding over the entire composition, Shiva's absolute serenity and the effortless pressure of a single toe embodies Shantarasa, into which all other rasas are ultimately absorbed. The sculpture thus functions not merely as dramatic illustration of a story, but as aesthetic pedagogy, guiding the viewer from agitation to stillness, from emotional multiplicity to metaphysical equilibrium. The inclusion of Shantarasa as the ninth rasa is not an afterthought but a philosophical necessity, as Shanta represents the point at which aesthetic experience converges with metaphysical insight. In 1986, B.N. Goswami had curated a series of exhibitions titled The Essence of Indian Art as a part of a broader international presentation of Indian art. It advances an argument that resonates deeply with the philosophical framework that Indian art is defined as less by stylistic evolution and more by distinctive way of seeing. Goswami repeatedly cautioned against reading ETL art through formalist or linear historical models derived from European art history, arguing instead that its rhetoric lies in a sustained civilizational attitude toward perception, emotion, and meaning. Kala and Vidya, training in human mind. Shilpa takes metaphysics in major. Texts such as the Manasara and Mayamata articulate a philosophy in which form is the visible crystallization of cosmic order. Measurement is never arbitrary and proportion is never merely decorative. Radhapun Mukherjee observes, Indian architecture is not a matter of spatial utility but of metaphysical correspondence. Architecture in this region is not a backdrop to ritual or sculpture, it is made of thought rendered in space. The Vastu Purusha Mandala represents one of the most sophisticated spatial philosophies ever articulated. Space, that is Akasha, is not neutral, it is structured, directional, and alive. The cosmic being, that is Purusha, is mapped into the site, aligning architecture with time, that is Kala, direction, dik, and ritual action. Goswami writes, Indian architecture doesn't occupy space, it articulates it. The temple is not merely a shelter for a deity, it is a diagram of the cosmos, experienced through movement, ritual, and perception, much like the internal geometry that holds the petals of a flower in dynamic balance. The insistence on measure, that is mana, and proportion, that is pramana, in Shilpa texts is often misunderstood as technical rigidity. In reality, it reflects a philosophical commitment to intelligibility. Order is not imposed arbitrarily, it is recognized. The mapping of the Purusha onto architectural space is not symbolic ornamentation. It is a spatial philosophy that asserts continuity between body, cosmos, and consciousness. Movement through the temple from the threshold to the Garbhagriha is a pedagogical journey, training perception through rhythm, scale, and orientation. This is why Indian architecture cannot be adequately understood through utilitarian or formalist lenses. It is neither sculpture enlarged nor shelter embellished. It is thought rendered spatially. Without reference to iconography, iconology, this discussion would not be completed. Description and interpretation of icons that enrich personality and culture of India is essential, for icons inspire, icons awake devotion, icons throw light on social practices and social behavior, icons teach ethical value, icons embody mythology, philosophy, metaphysics, as well as spiritual thinking. In brief, India presents a beautiful kaleidoscope of various theme-filled icons. Some are rare, some uncommon, and some unique. They suggest social transformation, social enlightenment, and social integration. Two of these personifying the Shiva Siddhanta and Shaiva Siddhanta and Pankaratra, and other three narrate. I had to show some slides in respect of this. And other three narrate the story of Jiva becoming Brahma. They are Panchagni Sadhana Tapasya Parvati, her obtaining Shiva, and Ardhanarishwara, Jivo, that is Jivo Brahmaiva Namprara. Slides. Oh, yeah. That I could see. The one is the first slide shows the narrative containing Ravana shaking Kailas at Ellora. I have already described this figure at large. Now the second one is contain two sculptures. One is of four-legged Shiva and another is of Vaikuntha. Four-legged Shiva, as Devangana Desai has recognized it at the personification of Shaiva Siddhanta. Now, what is Shaiva Siddhanta? It leads to the moksha, or it leads to understand Brahma. That is narrated in the Shaiva Siddhanta. So this is picturized over here. I go a step further. I say that this sculpture indicates Brahma, ultimate Brahma, that is moksha. And the another figure is of Vaikuntha. Said Jnaneshwar says, Jnanadeva mane Hari ha Vaikuntha. That is, Hari itself is Vaikuntha. We take Vaikuntha as the abode of Vishnu, but here Hari is shown or taken as Vaikuntha itself. It has four faces: Saddvagata, Vamadeva. Sorry, that Purush? No, that is of earlier slide, but here Vasudeva. So the Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. That is known as Vaikuntha. In at one place in Vishnu Sahasranam, probably 57 shloka, it says Vaikuntha Purusha Pratnya Pavana Parichati or something like that. That Vaikuntha is one of the names of Vishnu, which tells us something about Brahma. So that the first slide for like Shiva takes us to know Brahma through Shaivism, and the another one takes us to know Brahma through Vaishnavism. These are two sculptures, and I take these two as the personification of moksha, or Brahma. Another 3 slides are there. In one slide, we see the first one, we see the Panchagni Tapasya of Parvati. To 4 sides, Agni is there, fifth sun god is there, that is fifth Agni, and Parvati is performing penance. For what? To get Shiva. This is obviously, and almost all scholars of iconography, they say that is Parvati's Pankagni sadhana. But as you know, Parvati is a daughter of Himavana and Mena. So Parvati is a Jiva. And Jiva is performing penance, very severe one, for getting Shiva, for obtaining Shiva. Another slide suggests the same thing. This is Kalyana Sundara Murti to be seen at Kailash at Ellora. Now look here, interestingly, Parvati is shown holding hand of Shiva, not vice versa, as usual in our practice, marriage practice. What does it indicate? It is because of penance, Parvati could obtain Shiva. That is, Jiva could obtain Shiva. And see the figure closely, we will find that Shiva's hand is on shoulders of Parvati. It means Shiva has accepted Jiva. And the third slide is shown of Ardhanarishwara. It means Jiva tried to obtain Shiva. Jiva obtained Shiva in Kalyan, depicted in Kalyan Sundar Murti, and finally Jiva becomes Shiva. Jivo Brahmevo na paraha. Jiva is itself is a Brahma and nothing else. So this tells us about the obtaining of Brahma. So I take iconographical art is the flower itself and not petals, as described by Kapila Vatsyayan. I go further to say that these images, like that of Kalyan Sundamurti, etc., they are not petals of any flower, they present flower itself. And that is the ultimate goal of philosophical interpretation of iconographical art. Now I have given some concluding remarks, but I think that I should stop over here because we got Jiva at Burma. Thank you.
Good morning, friends. Most respected Professor Deglurkar, Dr. Ravi, my esteemed friends, Professor Maruti Nandan Tiwari, Dr. Aruni, Professor Somshekharji, Professor Patigar, and this august assembly of esteemed scholars. We are so many of my pages sitting, but I can't afford to mention all of them by name. I've been asked to be very brief. On the onset, I'm deeply grateful to the Indian Art History Congress and the Mythic Society Bangalore for the honor that has been conferred upon me. I remain fully aware that apart from your gracious consideration and magnanimity, I hold scant claim to this distinction. I possess little by which to warrant disappointment. When I look back at the long list of stalwarts who have occupied this chair before me, I feel like a dwarf standing before the giants. My only solace is that I have always been a recipient of the warmth emanated from my gurus, seniors, and my contemporary academic mates. In my own humble way, I shall endeavor my best to come up to your expectations. In presidential remarks, though I'll be coming with detailed discourtely care, one is supposed to say something about what had been said this morning. But after listening to Dr. Deglurkar ji, I feel it was partly for me like sitting in a class as a student learning from the teacher. He has always been deep, and today was no exception. He dwelt deeply upon literary aspects and related them to the images in various forms, sculpture, architecture, and so on. I was just killing him that we have almost all of us visited Ellora so many times, but the vision he has given, whether it is Ravan shaking the Kailash or the Kalyan Sundar or Vishnu Vaikon or Panchtapas Parvati, in angle from which he interpreted is worth saying. So, we are deeply grateful to you. For the organizers of this seminar, I have my heartfelt thanks, as everything they have organized is perfect to the course. Nothing is left to be desired. On behalf of all the delegates, I extend my heartfelt thanks to the Mythic Society for this conference. It's after a brief break, I shall share some more talk with you. And here I extend once again my thanks to all who are here this morning. Thank you.
First of all, as chairman, it becomes my duty again and again and again to welcome you all with heartfelt thanks to all the dignitaries on the dais, very respectable, dignitaries, and all the friends, research scholars, and the fraternity of art history. I will just say within 5 minutes what I have to say, because I should say something also. We all know Roop and Bhava, form and meaning. Form is one thing external and meaning is another. So he has talked about the meaning. Form also is the part of the expression, and it connotes so many things. And meaning also can be. There is a very good theory in Jainism, Anekantavad. Since the material we are dealing with, either in the form of a text or a temple or an icon, the person or the persons who were involved in creating those are not with us. So naturally it is a matter of from guess to reaching to the right level, and that could be in a very multiple way, anekantavad. It is a point how we see that. We see it in worldly context. You have philosophized. I must not say anything, but there are images, mostly Parvati you find. Actually, she is holding the hand of. It is the exception. So how to accept exception? That is also another point of interpretation. So far as the reflections or cultural thought is concerned, we have lightened the lamp. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrittur ma amritam gam. Cultural thoughts. So far as the art is concerned, he has talked about, and on the basis of the Vishnu Dharmottara Quran, Prakriti and Vikriti. Prakriti is phenomenal, not to be seen, not to be realized, not to be represented. But for the sake of the convenience of the people means us, we are not able to understand, everyone is not able to understand the abstract form, or rather no forms. He expressed him is the Supreme into different forms, and that becomes Vikriti, phenomenal. And that Vikriti, that phenomenal forms we are going to deal with. And the reflections are both Lok and Lokottar. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. These Purushartha Chatushtay. One can make study in all the forms of the temples and the images. The renderings of different forms and shades of religion. Religion is what? Not ritual. Religion is way of life, how best we can live as a social person, ideal. So that is there, and it starts, actually the basic I find is in Rigved. Ekam sad vipra bahudha vadant. 1.164.46. Again Rigved says, Rupam Rupam Pratirupo Bahu. He multiplies himself into many. Is it a Dvait or Advait? So basic is Advait. The seed is one. So the cultural ethos is that through the multiplication of forms, different kinds of architectural forms or different kinds of paintings, the ultimate is the realization of reaching to the point of oneness. And that finally says,
Shankaracharya Advait. Again, Ekam says Vipra Bahuda Vadanti Advait. And then there comes the composite icon Sangat images. Advait. How can you differentiate? He has talked about eternalization, but there are so many forms. Hariyar, Hariyar Pitama, Hariyar Hiragarbha. All are just to suggest one. And here is a social message, cultural ethos. The cultural ethos that how we can, through the texts and texts being translated into visual forms, be it temples, be it painting, be it sculptures, iconography forms, we, within multiplication, can find out the oneness, and that is the cultural ethos. Are we basically one? Isha Vatsya Sarvam Yat Kinchit Jagatyam Jagat. The moment we start thinking that as an individual we are separate, we are independent, I'm just as an individual, I will separate as other individuals are separate. They are. But there are so many things, just to start thinking, that we commonly do it. So basically every human being is one, every deity is one, every temple is one, in the spirit of Ekam Sat Vipra Bhaudavatan. And it is the Prakriti being manifested as Vipriti. So thank you very much.